To our panel this morning now, and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Opposition Leader Jim Chalmers and Parliamentary Secretary for Communications Paul Fletcher. Paul, first to you on the Union Royal Commission, a suggestion that Bill Shorten has been behind deals basically that saw employers paying for workers' union membership fees. What's wrong with that if, for example, the workers are aware of their memberships? These aren't phantom members, that they're aware that they're going to be joining the union, but simply their employers covering the costs. What's fundamentally wrong with that?
Well, good morning, Kieran, and those are good questions, and those are questions that really Bill Shorten needs to answer. Bear in mind that Bill Shorten was the State Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union at the time that at least some of these payments that have been revealed in the Trade Union Corruption Royal Commission occurred. So what seems to have occurred is that a particular building company entered into an arrangement with the AWU under which some $38,000 worth of payments were made, and those were shown as being for union memberships for, I think, some 105 employees of the company. So that raises some questions, which is no doubt why the Royal Commission is looking into it. It raises the question, well, what was the AWU doing, if anything, for the company in exchange for that money? Was there any understanding? Was there any arrangement? These are all questions that we need to understand, and we need to understand what the objective of the leadership of the AWU at that time was. Bill Shorten was the State Secretary and later National Secretary of the AWU for a considerable period of time, and these are all questions that I think Australians legitimately have an interest in knowing the answers to. Bill Shorten to date has not had much to say about what the AWU was doing at the time.
But if you look at this case, vis-a-vis Caesar Mellum, the government whip in Victoria that it stood down, there's a difference, it seems. As I say, we're looking at the reports here, and having not seen all the documents, we're going on second-hand reports. But on the surface, the difference appears that the Mellum case, we're talking about allegedly phantom members of unions. They didn't know they were members, whereas this other situation, they were fully cognizant of their membership, apparently. I guess that's the difference here.
Well, again, these are all questions that no doubt the Royal Commission is pursuing. It's important that we have a Trade Union Royal Commission because there are serious questions about governance, and members of trade unions have a right to know whether the leaders of those trade unions are acting in their interests as members, or whether they're perhaps more motivated by the desire to bulk up their numbers for internal Labor Party purposes. The more members a union is shown as having, then the more delegateships that union gets, and the more powerful that the secretary of that union and the other union officials become in the internal processes of the Labor Party. So there is a question here as to whether union officials are acting primarily in the interests of union members, or whether they're a bit more interested in advancing their own power. Now, these are all legitimate questions that the Trade Union Commission, Royal Commission, is looking into. The Abbott government established this Royal Commission because of serious concerns about trade union governance. We saw in the previous term with the Health Services Union, very, very serious issues of governance which have led to criminal proceedings and so on. And so that's why the Trade Union Royal Commission is looking into these issues. Now, the Labor Party, there are many people in the Parliamentary Labor Party who are former union officials, including, of course, the Leader of the Opposition. So these are legitimate questions of public policy. We need to understand what occurred in Victoria, and that, of course, is what the Trade Union Royal Commission is looking into. And Bill Shorten needs to do more than simply say he's not going to provide a running commentary.
But, before I'm going to get to Jim Chalmers a bit later, first I want to wrap up our conversation, Paul Fletcher, specifically on the Royal Commission. Isn't it best to allow the legal procedures, the processes to exhaust themselves rather than give a running commentary throughout? Isn't that the best practice?
Well, certainly it's important that we have a careful, thorough, fact-based investigative process, and that is what the Trade Union Royal Commission is carrying out. These are legitimate matters of public interest. If union members are in a position where they can't be sure if trade union officials are advancing their own interests, standing up for them, or are more interested in maximising the power of those trade union officials within the union movement, within the Labor Party, playing through into pre-selections and so on, then that is obviously an issue of concern.
On the housing prices, Paul Fletcher, we saw yesterday the RBA governor say what's happening in Sydney, in parts of Sydney, is crazy. The Treasurer the day before was suggesting that if they were unaffordable, if the market was unaffordable, no one would be buying the particular houses. I guess the messages don't seem like they're fully consistent between the two.
Well, look, I think there's a few things here. First of all, clearly Sydney is an expensive housing market, and it is challenging for first home buyers to make that initial leap into the housing market, be it in Sydney or anywhere else. That's important, as the Prime Minister himself has commented, as Joe acknowledged in his own comments. It is, for anybody wanting to get into the housing market, that's obviously a big and important step. Now, we want to encourage as many people as possible to be able to own homes. Home ownership has always been a big part of Australian society and the Australian economy. Now, one of the issues that Joe spoke about was the importance of increasing supply, getting more houses on the supply side, and that's very important. Indeed, the national accounts numbers, which came out yesterday, showed.
Did he show empathy? Did he show enough empathy, do you think?
Look, I can tell you, Joe is very concerned about the position of people in the housing market, both those trying to get into the housing market and another very important group, those who are in the housing market and who own homes. This is most people's most important asset, and it's important that the value of that asset be preserved. Most Australians would be very concerned about that.
Paul Fletcher, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. After the break, Jim Chalmers, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Opposition Leader, and also Attorney General George Brandis.